Alright, my people. Sit down for this mess, because what I am about to walk you through is going to make you look at every single celebrity net worth list, every bankruptcy headline, and every SEC filing you have ever scrolled past in a completely different way for the rest of your life. 50 Cent, the same 50 Cent that filed for bankruptcy back in 2015, the same 50 Cent that the entire internet clowned for being broke, the same 50 Cent that outlets from Forbes to TMZ declared washed and finished and cooked and done. That man was never broke. Not for 1 second. Not one day. And I can prove it to you using nothing but a piece of paper. 50 Cent signed himself under oath in a federal courthouse a decade ago. No, I did not misspeak. That is exactly what I said, and by the time we finish this video, you are going to be able to run this same trick on Carl Icahn, on any Fortune 500 balance sheet, on your own grandma's estate paperwork, and you are going to see the trillion-dollar blind spot that Wall Street, the financial press, and every single celebrity gossip site on this planet has been staring past since before you were born. This is the biggest hiding in plain sight con in modern finance, and it did not start on Wall Street. It started with a rapper from Queens, a bankruptcy schedule, and one 7-word confession printed in tiny type at the bottom of page 9. Now, somebody sent me a stock chart this morning, and this person had connected 2 dots that nobody else on the internet had connected yet. Yesterday I put up a small post about 50 Cent's bankruptcy filing, and I circled one specific line on his sworn financial schedule. Monthly income as a rapper, $2,166.66. Monthly expenses on his estate and his belongings, $163,700. And this reader, who apparently does nothing all day but rip apart public securities filings for fun, sent me a message that said, and I quote, "That is the exact same thing happening at Icahn Enterprises at this very moment." And when I pulled up Carl Icahn's most recent quarterly report, my people, that reader was correct. Dead correct. A sworn number in a federal bankruptcy court and an audited number filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission 10 days ago are both measurement conventions. They were never values. They were never truths. There is a canyon between what a document is legally required to say and what a thing would actually fetch on a Tuesday afternoon, and that canyon is where every serious fortune in modern American history has been made or lost. So we are going to walk through 2 documents today. One signed by a rapper. One filed by one of the most feared corporate raiders in American history. We are going to start with 50 Cent because his document is cleaner and it tells the whole story in half the pages. Once you see the trick inside 50 Cent's paperwork, the trick inside Carl Icahn's paperwork is going to hit you like a truck. Same defect. Same place. Same fingerprints. Let me clean this up for a second. In July of 2015, Curtis Jackson, better known to the planet as 50 Cent, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in a federal courthouse. When you file for Chapter 11, you fill out a series of schedules. Schedule A covers your real property. Your houses. Your land. Your buildings. Schedule B covers your personal property, and Schedule B runs down 35 numbered categories. You go line by line. You write in a number next to every category. You sign the document. And you swear to the accuracy of every digit under penalty of federal perjury. If you lie on that page, you do not just lose the case, you go to prison. Federal prison. That is how serious the signature at the bottom of that document is, and 50 Cent knew it, his lawyers knew it, and every single number on that page was scrubbed by people who bill in 6-minute increments before he ever touched a pen to it. When 50 Cent finished signing that document, Schedule A came out to $9,286,000. Schedule B came out to $15.5 million and 18 cents. Total assets, $24.8 million. Total liabilities, $32.5 million. So on paper, sworn on a federal record, filed in open court, one of the most commercially successful rappers of his generation reported a net worth of negative $7.7 million. Broke. Underwater. Insolvent. Down bad, as the kids like to say. And every headline on the planet ran with that number. Now, you know how the story ended. 50 Cent did not stay broke. Not even for a full news cycle. The same asset base that added up to negative $7.7 million on that piece of paper went on to produce a fortune for him that we can measure in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Power. Power Book 2. A television empire on Stars. A partnership with F&V Vodka that he cashed out of years earlier for real money that had already left his balance sheet by the time he filed. Producer credits. Streaming residuals. Every one of those revenue engines was quietly running the whole time. So either something miraculous happened to Curtis Jackson between 2015 and today, or that document was measuring something completely different from what all of us assumed it was measuring. And I am here to tell you, my people, it is the second thing. And the wildest part is, the document itself says so, in writing, right there on the page, if you know where to look. Flip to Item 13 of Schedule B. Item 13 asks about stock and interests in incorporated and unincorporated businesses. 50 Cent wrote in $4,712.24. $4,000. For all of the operating businesses that Curtis Jackson owned that day. And right underneath that line, in 7 quiet little words, the document confesses everything. 7 words. All entities listed are at their book value. 7 words that unlock the entire trick, sitting there in plain sight, printed on a page that 10,000 journalists read the week it was filed, and not a single one of them stopped to ask what those 7 words actually meant for the story they were about to publish. Book value. That is what the businesses cost him, minus depreciation, carried forward on a ledger. Book value answers the question, what did we pay for this asset? Which, and this is the part nobody wants to slow down and understand, is a completely different question from what is this asset worth right now. Book value is a receipt. Book value is a memory of a transaction that happened years or decades ago, frozen in ink, insulated from every ounce of good news, bad news, growth, decay, or revaluation that has happened since. That is what a fully operating, revenue-generating business looks like on a bankruptcy schedule. It looks like the price of the paperwork it took to form the company. And 50 Cent was following the form. His lawyers were following the form. Everybody in that courtroom was following the form. The convention is deliberately conservative. It is built to prevent people from overstating what they own, which means, as a predictable consequence, it understates the things that are hardest to value, every time, for every single person who ever fills one out. Here's what almost nobody outside of the accounting world will ever tell you. Modern accounting was not built for investors. It was not built for you. It was not built for me. It was built for creditors. It was built for the person deciding whether to lend you money. And that person does not care what your business might sell for on a great day. That person cares about one thing and one thing only. The floor. What can I actually seize and drag out of here if this whole thing falls apart tomorrow morning? So every time the rules face a fork between a higher number and a lower one, the rules march directly toward the lower one. Historical cost. Lower of cost or market. You are allowed to write an asset down. You are generally not allowed to write it back up. That principle is called conservatism, and it is the oldest principle in the entire discipline. And it works. It works because inflating what you claim to own is exactly how people defraud their lenders, and the entire scaffolding of accounting exists to make that fraud harder to pull off. That is a feature, not a bug. But every feature has a shadow, and the shadow of that feature is that every operating business, every catalog, every brand, every distribution moat, every customer relationship ever built shows up on the page for pennies on the dollar, or for nothing at all. The problem started later. The problem started when the general public began reading a document that was designed to protect creditors as if it were a valuation document designed to price businesses. Those are two completely different jobs. A fire code and an interior design brief are both about the building you live in, and nobody on earth would ever confuse those two things. So when 50 Cent's schedule declares that his businesses are worth $4,700, the document is doing its job flawlessly. It is telling the creditor the smallest, safest, most legally defensible number in the room. But when you read that same line and interpreted as here is what Curtis Jackson is worth as a human being, you have picked up the wrong document and you have read it correctly. You are not wrong. The paper is not wrong. The two of you are just answering different questions. And nobody ever taught the general public how to tell those two questions apart, which is why for 10 straight years the story of 50 Cent's bankruptcy was told by people who did not understand the difference between a valuation and a receipt. Now let me take you deeper, because Schedule B has this column labeled None. If a category does not apply to you, you tick that box and you keep moving. Item 22, Patents, Copyrights, and Other Intellectual Property. 50 Cent, None. This is the man who, at the time of that signature, had sold something north of 30 million records worldwide. Get rich or die tryin'. Into club. Candy shop. Many men. Pimp. A catalog that other people have since built entire 9-figure businesses on top of. Sync licensing. Sample clearances. Streaming royalties. And next to copyrights, he wrote none. Item 21, other contingent and unliquidated claims, none. Item 23, licenses, franchises, and other general intangibles, none. Blank. 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 All the way down the page. I know exactly what that looks like. That looks like a man hiding his assets from creditors. A man who sold 30 million records, filed owing $32 million, and wrote the word none next to the entire concept of intellectual property. If someone were trying to shield a catalog from creditors, that is precisely what the page would look like. But that is not what happened here. There are real, boring, defensible accounting reasons why that page reads the way it reads. A self-created copyright has no purchase price to carry on the books because you never bought it. You made it. You wrote it. You performed it. And a big chunk of the underlying rights sat inside operating entities, which is precisely why those entities show up under item 13 at book value. So the document is correct. Internally consistent. Followed every rule to the letter. And it still tells anyone reading it that the intellectual property of one of the best-selling recording artists of the entire modern era is worth exactly $0 in the summer of 2015. That is not fraud. That is not concealment. That is the form doing exactly what the form was built to do. Let that sit with you for a second, my people. A legal document can be 100% accurate and 100% useless as a measure of value at the exact same time, because it was answering a question nobody was asking. It was never talking about his worth. It was talking about the smallest number a bankruptcy trustee could stand behind in court while trying to divide up the assets between angry creditors. That is a completely different job from what the readers of TMZ and the Shade Room thought they were reading when the headlines dropped. Now, the tidy little takeaway you would expect from this is, hey, book value runs low, go buy cheap stocks, that is the whole trick. And I am here to tell you, my people, that is not the whole trick. The document itself proves that is not the whole trick. Look at the real estate on the same filing. He had a mansion in Farmington, Connecticut. 21 bedrooms. A recording studio. A nightclub in the basement. Scheduled at $8.3 million. That same house sold in April of 2019 for $2.9 million. The schedule was 65% too high. 65. So inside one single document, sworn on one single day, by one single hand, both errors sit side by side on the same afternoon. His operating businesses were carried far too low. His house was carried far too high. Both wrong. Wrong in opposite directions. Signed by the same man on the same page under the same oath. And that, right there, is what settles the whole hiding assets accusation once and for all. Nobody hides money by writing their own house up to nearly 3 times what it actually sells for. You cannot be understating on purpose and overstating on purpose inside the same filing on the same page on the same afternoon. That is not fraud. That is not clever. That is not a strategy. That is the accounting convention doing exactly what it was built to do, in 2 different directions, on 2 different asset classes, and neither of those directions has anything to do with the truth about what Curtis Jackson actually owned. He was never broke, my people. He never hit a dime. His problem was liquidity. His problem was cash flow. He owed the wrong people money on the wrong timeline, and the form has no column for the mismatch between what you own and how fast you can turn it into cash. A balance sheet is wrong in a direction you can actually predict. The direction depends entirely on the class of asset you are looking at. Hard assets get appraised, and appraisals drift toward whatever the owner is hoping for, because the appraiser wants to keep getting hired next year. Operating businesses get carried at cost, and cost has absolutely nothing to do with earnings power. Self-created intangibles like brands and catalogs show up as zero because nobody ever wrote a check to create them. 3 asset types. 3 completely different distortions. All inside the same signed document. So the trick is knowing which one you are holding and knowing which way it is leaning. Alright, now I need you to hold Curtis Jackson in your mind while I introduce you to somebody far scarier. Somebody with a legal team the size of a small country and an audit report signed by one of the largest accounting firms on the planet. You have all seen the movie Wall Street. Michael Douglas. Charlie Sheen. Greed is good. That character, Gordon Gekko, was never one real person. Oliver Stone assembled Gordon Gekko out of a handful of real corporate raiders who were running this exact playbook in the 1980s, back when the phrase leveraged buyout was still terrifying to boards of directors. And one of those raiders, arguably the most important one, is a man named Carl Icahn. The Greed is Good speech itself was lifted almost word for word from a real graduation speech given by a real financier named Ivan Boesky at UC Berkeley, but that is a whole other video for another Tuesday. Carl Icahn is now 90 years old. Carl Icahn has been running this game since the 1970s. Carl Icahn is the man that the phrase corporate raider was more or less invented to describe in the financial press. And Carl Icahn's playbook has never really changed in 50 years. Carl Icahn buys a huge slice of a company nobody else wants to touch, and then Carl Icahn goes to war with the management of that company, loudly, publicly, on television, in shareholder letters, in proxy fights, until they cave in and give him what he wants. Sometimes he wants a dividend. Sometimes he wants a board seat. Sometimes he wants the whole company broken up and sold for parts. TWA. Texaco. Blockbuster. RJR Nabisco. Motorola. Netflix. Apple. Herbalife. All of them have been targets of Carl Icahn at one point or another, and every single one of those fights left a paper trail longer than a phone book. And if you want the version that translates cleanest for our generation, back in 2013, Carl Icahn and another billionaire named Bill Ackman got into a screaming, half-hour-long argument on live television on CNBC, moderated by a very uncomfortable Scott Wapner, about a company called Herbalife. Two of the richest men in America. On cable. Live. Yelling at each other by name in front of everybody with a Bloomberg terminal and a lunch break. That, my people, is what a beef looks like when it is fought in tax brackets you and I will never see. And Carl Icahn has been running beefs like that for 50 straight years. And Carl Icahn usually walks away with the money in his pocket. Now let me clean this up real quick before we go further. Nobody got outsmarted here. Carl Icahn did not make a mistake. Carl Icahn is not the villain of this story. The defect I am about to show you exists in every single balance sheet filed in every single industry across the American economy. Carl Icahn's is just the one somebody slid across my desk this morning, and it happens to be a very cleanly illustrated example of the exact same disease we just watched infect 50 Cent's bankruptcy schedule. I have no position in Icahn Enterprises. I am making no claim about what the company is currently worth or where the stock is going. No recommendation. No target. No opinion on the security. I am just going to read you what Carl Icahn filed with the SEC, and show you the same defect sitting inside a professionally audited public company document that we just saw sitting inside 50 Cent's handwritten bankruptcy schedule. Same disease. Different suit. August 5, 2026, Icahn Enterprises files its quarterly report for the period ending June 30th. These are all public documents. Anyone with a computer can pull these off the SEC website in 90 seconds. Anyone. Free. The balance sheet, top-line numbers. Total assets, $12.89 billion. Total liabilities, $10.74 billion. Stated equity, roughly $2.1 billion. Approximately 710.9 million units outstanding. Which means the book value of Icahn Enterprises, as reported by Icahn Enterprises itself, lands at roughly $3 per unit. $3. Write that number down in your head because it is going to matter in about 90 seconds. Now flip forward to the section of the filing labeled Subsequent Events. Subsequent Events is the part of every quarterly report that almost nobody ever reads. Boring name. Buried at the back. Set in tiny type. Nobody talks about it on CNBC. Nobody quotes it on Twitter. On July 19, 2026, Icahn Automotive signed a stock purchase agreement to sell Pep Boys, the tire and auto service chain your dad probably took his Chevy Blazer to in 1998, to a company called Mavis Tire Supply, for a base purchase price of $700 million. $700 million. One single business inside one segment of a company whose entire stated equity is only $2.1 billion. One subsidiary agreed to sell for roughly one-third of the entire company's stated book equity in a single transaction that took the market almost no time to metabolize. And that $700 million appears nowhere. Nowhere on the balance sheet. I read you the balance sheet myself. $12.89 billion in assets. The balance sheet is dated June 30th. The Pep Boys agreement was signed July 19th. The $700 million number lives in a text paragraph tucked behind the financial statements, and not a single dollar of it touches the assets column. Not one. So we have the exact same defect as item 13 on 50 Cent's Schedule B. An operating business carried at what it originally cost the company decades ago. A real buyer walks up with a real check and says something completely different. And the document has no obligation whatsoever to reconcile those two numbers for you, the reader, the shareholder, the analyst, the journalist, or anybody else who happens to open the file. That Pep Boys sale is a signed agreement with a base price subject to standard closing adjustments. It is not closed yet as of this recording. But a contracted price from an identified strategic buyer is 1,000 times better evidence of value than a decades-old carrying cost sitting on a general ledger nobody ever updates. And it is exactly the class of evidence that a balance sheet is structurally incapable of absorbing. The balance sheet cannot see the buyer. The balance sheet can only see receipts, and the receipts stopped matching the moment the ink dried on them. Here is where it gets truly wild. There is something inside that same Icahn filing that is even more revealing than the Pep Boys paragraph, and it is the smoking gun that proves the whole system is asymmetric by design. Go back to accounting policies. The carrying value of Icahn Enterprises' long-term debt is roughly $6.4 billion. The estimated fair value of that same debt is $6.2 billion. In other words, Icahn Enterprises is required, by disclosure regulation, to tell you what their debt is actually worth in the open market. Not what it says on the ledger. What it would trade for today. There is an entire disclosure regime built specifically around fair value marking for debt, complete with 3-tier hierarchies and quarterly updates and audit sign-offs. And there is no equivalent line, no footnote, no regime, no rule, no requirement anywhere in that filing telling you what the operating businesses inside the company are actually worth on the same fair value basis. Let me repeat that so it lands. The convention marks one side of the balance sheet to mark it in a footnote. The convention stays completely silent on the other side. That is by design. Nobody is hiding anything. But the design has a direction, and once you know the direction, you are reading a completely different document than the 99% of people who ever open that filing. The debt is marked to what a buyer would pay for it. The assets are frozen at what a seller once accepted for them. Symmetry would tell you both. The convention tells you one. That gap is the entire game. That gap is where careers get made, where re-ratings happen, where the market slowly, painfully, one quarterly report at a time, drags a share price back toward the truth the balance sheet was never structurally allowed to admit. Everything I have shown you so far is a balance sheet problem. But the same defect runs straight through the income side of the equation too, and this is where the trick gets truly beautiful. Come back with me to 50 Cent's filing one more time. His sworn monthly income. Wages, as an entertainer and rapper, $2,166.66. Income from operating businesses, roughly $163,000. Interest and dividends, roughly $19,600. Same month. Same man. Same document. Signed at the bottom of the same page. Show a stranger nothing but the wage line, and that stranger tells you they are looking at somebody working a normal middle-class job. A shift manager at a mid-sized company. A schoolteacher in a decent district. Show them the business line, and they are staring at a wealth engine that generates almost $2 million a year without anybody swinging a hammer. The wage line describes the version of Curtis Jackson that the public thinks it knows. The business line describes the version of Curtis Jackson that Curtis Jackson actually is. One number is a fact. The other is a diagnosis. One number describes where you show up. The other describes what you built. And that entire split was available on the filing, for free, on the day it was filed, to anyone in the world who could open a PDF and scroll down 2 pages. Now go back and pull the news coverage from July of 2015. Every single headline said the same thing. 50 Cent files for bankruptcy. 50 Cent is broke. How the rapper lost it all. Total assets $24.8 million, total liabilities $32.5, and the subtraction did the rest. Every one of those outlets had access to the exact document I have been reading to you for the last few minutes. Free. Public. Filed that week. Delivered straight to their inboxes by the Pacer docket alert system. And I cannot find a single one that quoted item 13. Not one that mentioned the none column. Not one that split the wage line off from the business line. Not one that pointed out the 7-word confession printed at the bottom of the schedule. They read the front page and they stopped, because they were either lazy or unqualified or both. Then a few years passed, and the same outlet started publishing pieces titled "How Did 50 Cent Get Rich Again?" as if something new had suddenly happened. My people, nothing happened. Nothing new. The businesses that were sitting there at book value in 2015 were sitting there the whole time. The Power franchise was already in production. The catalog was still generating streams and syncs. The story changed because the coverage was wrong the first time, and nobody went back to check their homework. The celebrity net worth lists deserve the exact same treatment, by the way. Those numbers are guesses. Guesses built on public reporting, industry rules of thumb, and in some cases whatever the celebrity or their publicist decided to whisper into somebody's ear over dinner at Nobu. There is no audit. There is no filing. There is no signature under penalty of perjury. When a magazine tells you what a celebrity is worth, you are reading an estimate assembled by a writer in New York with a logo attached to it and a deadline to hit. Meanwhile, sitting in a federal court file is a document signed by that same celebrity under penalty of federal perjury, free for anyone with the patience to open it. One of those two things is a source. The other is a vibe. I know which one I trust. You can run this exact 3-question interrogation on any set of financials in about 10 minutes flat. 10 minutes. That is the entire toolkit. Question 1. Which lines are carried at cost? Anything the entity bought and held onto. Operating businesses. Equipment. Real estate acquired a long time ago. Timberland purchased in 1974. Warehouses depreciated to $1. Expect those lines to run low. Expect the distortion to get worse the further back the purchase was, because the number froze on that transaction date and the entire world kept moving forward without it. That gap is a gift for whoever notices it first. Question 2. Which lines required somebody to make an estimate? Appraised property. Level 3 fair value marks. Anything illiquid with no recent trade. Anything that only gets valued once a quarter by a committee. Those lines drift toward whatever the owner is hoping to see, and the drift is largest exactly where there is no open market to check the estimate against. 50 Cent's mansion at $8.3 million against a $2.9 million sale price is a textbook example of that drift. Nobody committed misconduct. That is simply what estimates do when they are left alone with hope, unchecked by a market willing to write a real check. Question 3. What sits in the none column, or is missing from the page altogether? Brands. Self-created intellectual property. Customer relationships. Distribution advantages. A catalog someone built instead of bought. A software platform written in-house. A logistics network refined over 20 years. A 20 million follower social presence. All of it reads as a zero. And, my people, that zero is very frequently the single most valuable thing the entity owns. The single most valuable thing. Sitting on the page as a blank. Because accounting was never designed to price something nobody ever bought. The move that beats all 3 of these questions is to hunt for a transaction. Especially a recent one. Especially a signed one. A signed price from a real buyer settles in one line an entire decade of balance sheet arguments. That is exactly why the Pep Boys paragraph is worth more than the entire financial statement it was printed behind. Somebody wrote a real number down. Somebody agreed to stand behind that number in a court of law. And when you find a transaction price sitting right next to a carrying value inside the same document, you are staring directly at the gap between the two. That gap is the entire game. That gap is where the money is. This, my people, is what I do for a living. The celebrity stuff, the 50 Cent stuff, the pop culture packaging, that is the fun part. That is the wrapper. The actual work is finding a place where a document that is legally required to produce a specific number has drifted away from the thing that number was supposed to represent, and then working out which direction the drift runs. That is Carvana. That is how I found Carvana back when nobody wanted to touch it. That is Open Door. That is every single re-rating call I have ever caught in my career. It has never once been about predicting the future. I do not know the future. Nobody does. The work is noticing that the present is already being described by a convention, that the convention carries a bias, and that the bias is completely legible if you just open the file and read it slowly with a pencil in your hand. And almost nobody opens the file. Almost nobody. That, right there, is the opportunity. For anybody looking for real value in a world drowning in headlines and hot takes and 30-second video clips. A bankruptcy schedule is free. A 10K is free. The land registry is free. The SEC website is free. Everything I just walked you through cost me nothing but time and a willingness to read carefully instead of scroll quickly. That is the entire competitive edge. A wage does not appear on a balance sheet. Not at book value. Not at fair value. Not in the none column. A wage is not on the balance sheet page at all, because you cannot own a wage. A wage is an income statement line that runs while you run and stops the moment you stop. Everything we just read together, both documents, both signatures, both filings, was a record of what somebody owns, not what somebody earns. 50 Cent in 2015 owned a catalog, a name, and a stake in a beverage company. 2 of those 3 were carried at nothing. One of them had already been quietly sold for a number the balance sheet never had to acknowledge. Carl Icahn's entire corporate structure is a claim on assets, and a $700 million check can land inside a $2.1 billion company because somebody, somewhere, owned Pep Boys outright and that ownership was carried on the ledger at whatever it cost to acquire the chain back in 2015. Neither of these men got there on a salary. Neither of them ever will. And neither will anybody who ever built anything worth building. And the single line on 50 Cent's form that turned out to matter the most, more than any other line, more than every dollar figure combined, was the line marked none. Copyrights. None. Blank. 0. The form was correct on every single line. It was answering a question nobody was asking, and the world spent a decade reading the answer as though it had been the answer to a completely different question. That is the trick. That is the entire trick. That is why the market underprices some things for years at a time and why patient, careful readers of boring documents get to eat other people's lunches for a living. So, my people, I want you to go look at your own position the exact same way. I just made you look at 2 documents belonging to somebody else. 2 men who probably will never know your name. Now turn the microscope around. Point it at yourself. Which parts of your own life are carried on the books at what they cost you, and which parts are being priced by an appraisal in your head, and which parts are sitting in the none column? Because every single one of you has all 3. Every single person watching this video does. All the time. Every single day of your life. Something in your life is on your books at what it cost you, and it is quietly producing far more than that. A skill you spent $3,000 learning in a night class that now earns you $50,000 a year on the side. A relationship you invested in 20 years ago that now opens doors you did not even know existed. Something else has a number attached to it in your head, and that number is what you hope it would fetch, not what it would actually fetch on a Tuesday afternoon if you had to sell it in a hurry. Your car. Your condo. Your Rolex. Your grandmother's ring. The valuation lives in your head, and the market lives somewhere else, and the two only shake hands at the moment of transaction. And there is always a third thing. The thing you built yourself, from scratch, that never had a purchase price at all. That thing shows up nowhere. Not on any page. Not in any spreadsheet. And that third thing, more often than not, is the single most valuable asset you own. Your reputation. Your network. Your name. Your voice. Your body of work. All of it, sitting in the none column of your own personal balance sheet, doing nothing but generating everything. 50 Cent had all 3 of those assets on the same page, on the same day, signed by the same hand. Item 13 at book value. His Farmington mansion at an inflated appraisal. The copyright line marked none. The form was right about every single line. The form was answering a question nobody was asking, and the world read the answer as if it had been the answer to a completely different question. And that, right there, is where the money is made in this business. Every single time. On every single deal. In every single re-rating I have ever caught. It is the same disease. It is the same diagnosis. It is the same cure. Alright my people, that is the trick. That is the whole trick. Now go pull one filing. Any filing. Your favorite company. The company you work for. The company your parents own stock in. And run those 3 questions on it. Cost. Estimate. None. I promise you, before you finish your first cup of coffee tomorrow morning, you will find a line on that page that is telling you something the rest of the market has not figured out yet. Drop your take under this video and let me know what you found. Tell me down below which of these 3 defects hit you the hardest, and which company you are going to interrogate first. Argue with me in the comments if you think I am wrong about Carl Icahn. Argue with me if you think 50 Cent really was hiding assets. The best comment gets pinned to the top by the time I wake up. And if you are new around here, you already know what to do. Subscribe. Ring the bell so the notifications actually reach you. Because tomorrow, I am walking you through the exact same 3-question trick applied to a company you almost certainly already own inside your index fund, and you are not going to believe what the none column is quietly hiding from every single shareholder on the register. I will catch up with you next time.